Angry young men.
Far-right extremists.
Radicalize young men.
Young boys.
Young boys are being radicalized online.
Yo, what is going on, guys? Got a video for you here today from Lungs of Faith, and this should be a good one, just kind of showing all of the garbage that has been shoved down men's throats over the years, and also kind of showcases the fact that men are just done in general, especially young men. So let's jump into it.
Listen, I'll say the quiet part out loud that nobody wants to say. According to the data, the ideological shift is overwhelmingly happening on the female side, not the male side.
But I'm always, I think I'm just too old or something. I'm like, why isn't anyone married? You tell me, why aren't people married?
Well, I mean, honestly, it's the women. The women are extremely liberal. No one talks about that, especially after the last election. There's a 45-point difference.
The reason for that is not what you think. Here's where things get interesting and honestly a little bit bizarre, because baked into this narrative of men becoming misogynists and radicalized is a paradox that I'm about to expose to you. The story you always hear is the same. Men are becoming radicalized. Men are falling into extremism. The manosphere is brainwashing young boys.
All politics aside, you can't deny that things are messed up. You have an entire population of women with some of the most insane ideas turning around and saying that men are the problem. They call men extremists when all we do is point out their hypocrisy. It's just not normal.
But here's the contradiction, and this is the part that absolutely nobody wants to acknowledge for some reason. Men's ideology hasn't actually shifted that much. They've stayed roughly where they were about 10, 15, or even 20 years ago on many of the major points. And even compared to 100, 200, 300, and so on years ago, they're not radically different. A little bit more progressive, but not radically. The study we looked at earlier isn't the only one noticing this caked-in trend. That's not my opinion. This is Pew, Gallup, YouGov, take your pick. So think about this logically. If men stayed the same and women moved, why is the entire culture narrative focused on the male radicalization?
Womanism has completely warped the minds of multiple generations. We're at a point in human history where women straight up hate men, and men have had enough and simply decided to walk away. And because we're not playing their stupid games, they naturally blame us for everything that's going wrong.
Well, because of one thing. There is an agenda. They have made it clear to us. And if they didn't want us to believe that, they wouldn't be saying it. In 2019, the American Psychological Association released an official guideline declaring that traditional masculinity, stoicism, competitiveness, leadership, risk-taking is inherently harmful. The United Nations, through the He for She movement, teaches that global gender problems originate primarily from male behavior patterns. Corporate advertising and HR, from Gillette to Nike to Dove, constantly portray men as violent, impulsive, or in need of ideological correction.
And every time these corporations try to pull that anti-man message, they get hit with a massive boycott. Gillette ended up destroying their entire male consumer base with that stunt of an ad. It never worked, but they kept on doing it for years. It was just bizarre.
All the while presenting women as morally superior. And academia, especially gender studies programs since the 1980s, have built its entire framework on the idea that masculinity is a political problem that must be dismantled and re-engineered. So the message is clear and coordinated across these institutions. Men are the issue, masculinity is the problem, and the culture must fix them. This isn't about, hey man, you're becoming too radical and it's hurting society and you need to stop. It's about, we want you to fit into our program. We already socially engineered and radicalized women in the 20th century, and now you just need to get on board with our agenda. Or else, we will label your perfectly rational view of life in the world as radical until you simply get tired of it and throw in the towel. And frankly, from my experience and the first-hand evidence of the internet, men are just not having that.
You can't force men into that little box. It's just not possible, especially after their tactics involved relentless bullying, mockery, and isolation. At a certain point, it just stops working and men simply don't care anymore.
That's why you have the reaction of the manosphere influencers like Andrew Tate and guys like that, who I have to say I have my disagreements with as a practicing Catholic. You stretch a rubber band far enough, eventually it's going to snap back at you. Now all this starts to make a lot of sense when we look at the actual facts, and the facts are insane, because the really radical stuff happens at the incentive level, the incentive structures that society has placed for women. The modern economy rewards women for becoming more liberal and punishes them for becoming more traditional. Think about it. Women now earn 60% of bachelor's degrees, 70% of master's degrees, nearly 60% of all PhDs, and universities are basically ideological factories, and their ideology is overwhelmingly progressive.
That's one of the biggest arguments for modern women. I have a college degree, therefore I am better than you. Even though the degree is virtually worthless most of the time, they had to take on massive debt just to get the damn thing, and it's left them even more lonely and miserable than before.
What exactly do universities incentivize for women? Career-first identity, anti-family framing, don't settle too soon, distrust of men, hyper-individual autonomy, therapy language morality, gender-based activism, secular spirituality over religious commitment. None of this is a conspiracy, it's just the modern incentive system, and I think they would happily admit that to you. And they're all trying to sell this perspective to you that it's all coming from an organic feminist movement. This is all just grassroots and it's just natural. This is the natural progression of life, but the evidence just becomes overwhelmingly against that. When we look into this with sober eyes, these schools are not neutral playgrounds. According to a Manhattan Institute study, 7 out of 10 students in the US are exposed to at least one critical social justice concept in K-12 classes, even in private and parochial institutes.
We see the brainwashing all the time with a lot of these modern women. They parrot the same talking points, and it's even come to the point where these women honestly don't think they could have opened up a small business until the 1990s. It's not an exaggeration either. They honestly think that.
Another study found that most schools in North America teach left-wing racial ideology as if it were an established fact, even though it's highly disputed. Global parliamentary researchers in Australia concluded that progressive ideology is so deep-seated that most teachers don't even see it as an ideology anymore. And when you look at education schools, the institutions that train teachers, one historian observes that progressivism is the ruling ideology there. Again, none of this comes to us as a surprise, but these studies back it up. In other words, the pipeline for ideology runs from teacher training to curriculum to classroom, all from one source. And if you question it as a teacher, your entire career is at risk in places like Canada.
It's crazy and kind of sad to me to see how many teachers inject politics into the classroom of kids who aren't even old enough to ride bikes yet. Instead of learning how to read and write, they're being told political talking points that have no business being discussed in the classroom at all. The kids don't have a chance to understand any other arguments.
The tenured professor Francis Widdowson was terminated in December 2021 after publicly criticizing the university's indigenization agenda and other ideological positions.
And you are no longer employed at Mount Royal University. What happened?
An Indigenous scholar activist, because I was defending a journalist who had been pushed out of her job for referring to a book title that had a racial epithet in it. And as a result of that, this Indigenous scholar activist by the name of Gabrielle Lindstrom, who now goes by the name Gabrielle Weaselhead, she mobilized an anonymous student group against me. A whole bunch of her supporters piled on. I was found to have harassed her.
An arbitrator later ruled her firing as disproportionate and unjust, although she never regained her position.
We see this kind of behavior all the time. Either fall in line or the horde of womanists will be unleashed to destroy you. It's not just in academia. We see it on social media, false claims, and pretty much in all walks of life. And these people think that what they're doing is just appropriate somehow.
Because a number of Indigenous scholar activists and a trans activist feel unsafe about me making arguments that they don't like, it has been the arbitrator decided that I couldn't return.
This shows a concrete event where ideological nonconformity led to professional consequences in a university setting. But it's not only about firing dissenting voices. Institutions themselves respond to financial and reputational incentives. A UK study found higher education reforms created perverse incentives for universities to shape behaviors and ideologies in order to secure funding and regulatory advantages. This data comes from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Another paper documents how colleges respond to student aid, loan default penalties, and enrollment benchmarks by shaping admissions and outcomes.
This is just straight up bribery. If you play ball, you win prizes. If you don't, then you'll be punished. This is not how things are supposed to go in society. This is why men have had enough and decided to make a new path for themselves instead of playing this rigged game.
And a commentary in University Affairs explains that there's no such thing as pure science. The interests of different parties shape the questions being asked and how incentive structures direct how those questions are answered. Let's put it simply. If a university is rewarded for diversity metrics, for activism, for social justice frameworks, then people inside it will naturally lean that way, because that is how institutional survival, funding, and reputation are built. Now, it really seems to me that the problem that these ideologues are pushing is not that they have a problem with authoritarianism, but rather that the authoritarianism isn't of their flavor. The system is rigged to ensure one outcome. Go to school, you become progressive. Delay your family, become progressive. Enter corporate HR pipeline, become progressive. It's ironic for a position that always claims women aren't given a chance and given a choice in a patriarchal society, but are they really being given a choice here, or is the outcome completely fixed? And if they were really given the choice, which one do you think they would choose? If we had a university program specifically funded and dedicated to training women to become better wives and better housekeepers, how many women would quit their STEM degrees in order to pursue that? Personally, from talking to a lot of women in my generation, I think a very high number would. But things only become worse when we look at the male situation.
The funny thing is that there were public school classes that actually taught those things. It was called home economics, and it gave people the skills they needed to not only cook and clean, but also manage a home. But it was done away with because it was seen as sexist, of course.
While women were being funneled into universities, corporations, and institutions that shape political ideology, men are quietly walking away from the entire system. And this isn't speculation, this is hard economic data. Over the last 15 to 20 years, more than 7 million prime-age men ages 25 to 54 have disappeared from the workforce in the United States alone. Where exactly are they? They're not in school, they're not in training, they're not in job hunting, and they're not transitioning between careers. They're simply gone from the labor force. But why? Are they all suddenly Bitcoin millionaires and just don't need to work anymore? Are they living off the backs of female slave economy? Oops, wasn't supposed to say that one out loud. And today, the labor force participation rate for men is the lowest it's been since the Great Depression.
It really is a simple question. Why would any man loyally serve a system that has convinced everyone to hate him simply because he's a dude? It makes no sense at all, and it only is natural for men to see this and just check out from it all entirely.
Among young men, 18 to 29, the numbers are even worse. Unemployment has surged. Not in education, employment, or training. Entire segments of young men are living completely outside the productive economy and the bounds of civilization. And how are they surviving? The data shows disability payments, welfare payments, parental support, random gig scraps, or literally doing nothing at all. Economists call this the male dropout crisis. Sociologists call it the great male opting out. And here's the core point. Women are being ideologically pulled into the system. Men are being economically pushed out of it. That means men aren't getting college indoctrination. Men aren't embedded in corporate HR departments. Men aren't absorbing ideological messaging 8 hours a day. Most men aren't even in the building. So of course men's worldview stays relatively stable. They're not inside the institutional machinery that rewrites ideology. Think about other times we've seen that in civilization. Things like this typically lead to some sort of a movement.
The funny thing is that the average man who buys into the womanist narrative is typically the most angry, lonely, and miserable man there is. At that point, you're trying to force a square peg in a round hole. It can only happen if you're beaten hard enough, and it's just ridiculous.
This raises a question that nobody ever asks, but everyone feels. Why are corporations, school systems, governments, NGOs, pharmaceutical companies, makeup brands, food companies, clothing companies, literally every sector of society obsessed with shaping women's worldviews? Why do they spend billions of dollars every year on campaigns targeted at women? If women are supposedly tired of the patriarchy and finally empowered, then why does every powerful institution on earth treat them like a demographic they have to constantly convince, recruit, affirm, and ideologically maintain? Think about it. Why do governments pour money into women-centric advertising? Why do NGOs frame every issue through women and girls? Why is every corporate marketing department obsessed with female empowerment messaging? Why are pharmaceutical companies spending billions on contraception campaigns, hormone campaigns, fertility control messaging? Why do school boards and universities create bureaucracies around gender equality, women's studies, DEI for female students? Why do political parties build entire election strategies around the female vote?
It really all is about control. When you think about it, it's a lot easier to convince an entire population of women to dislike men and not the other way around. All that's needed is constant validation and incentives to do it, really.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
If women were naturally aligned with these worldviews, wouldn't you think they wouldn't need to be so sold? And you don't have to look any further than the gargantuan numbers they're spending. UN Women's budget was $1.3 billion spent between 2010 and 2020, explicitly on programs to reshape gender norms and shift cultural attitudes. The US government has spent hundreds of millions annually, around $200 to $500 million a year on gender ideology programs abroad, so these are programs outside of the United States. Over $4.5 billion spent on women and girls initiatives since 2000. Many of these programs openly target fertility norms, sexual norms, family planning attitudes, traditional gender roles, and they describe their goal as changing beliefs and behaviors at scale. Planned Parenthood's advocacy spends over $45 million per year on political campaigns aimed specifically at women.
What's truly disturbing about all of this is how effectively all of this has actually worked. All you need to do is look at the rise in promiscuity with women. They have been encouraged to destroy their femininity and destroy themselves in some of the worst ways possible.
But here's the thing, you don't spend $100 billion convincing someone of something they already supposedly believe. Where big money goes, and where return on investment is unclear, the most plausible conclusion is that there's something they value more than short-term money. They're loyal to an ideology. And to see these insane tactics, all you have to do is look at where the money flows. The Rockefellers heavily funded the Women's Bureau, the National Urban League, and various women's reform initiatives in the early 20th century. John D. Rockefeller Jr. personally funded Margaret Sanger, the infamous eugenicist founder of Planned Parenthood, who said things like, "More children from the fit, less from the unfit. We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and birth control must lead ultimately to a cleaner race. And the most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it."
And the very same supporters of this woman were the same women who called out Sydney Sweeney and American Eagle for supporting eugenics. And the sad part is, even if you point that out, modern women still wouldn't care.
This is someone with zero empathy, zero concern for human life, and yet is being funded and placed at the center of, apparently, humanity's mission to enrich our lives. The Rockefeller Foundation openly wrote that lowering birth rates among undesirable groups was a goal. Population control and social engineering were the two biggest research priorities. Now take Alfred Kinsey. They even funded his studies based on sexual assault victims, lots of which being minors, that stripped these cases of their criminal status and used them as data points in his research, seeking to prove how sexual nonconformity is a good thing. His first grant in 1941 was $1,600. Not too much, but by 1947 his project was pulling in about $40,000 to $100,000 a year, which, keep in mind, is about $600,000 to $1 million in today's currency, among the tens of dozens, if not hundreds, of other like experiments that they're also funding. This money financed massive sex history interviews, some involving minors, and set the stage for what many call the sexual revolution.
That particular revolution opened the door to the absolute disaster that we live in now. Hookup culture has done more than its fair share of damage to how men and women bond, and that kind of damage just can't be repaired. It's almost horrific how efficiently that was able to work.
But the point still stands, and the question is still unanswered. If a movement is truly organic, it spreads on its own. But if a movement contradicts human nature, you have to subsidize it, you have to incentivize it, and you have to market it relentlessly. So why do governments and corporations treat women like a population that must be constantly maintained? Because the worldview being sold is not the worldview human nature defaults to. Women are not naturally hostile to family or motherhood or faith or stability. They have to be coaxed away from those things with promises of a hypothetical utopia, career fulfillment and sexual freedom, lifestyle independence, empowerment through consumption. In other words, if the product was really that good, it would sell itself. It doesn't. So they market it harder, and that's why every institution is obsessed with winning women. And by who? Ironically, men. Perverted men. Ones like Michael Foucault, who advocated for the abolition of the age of consent laws in France.
If you were to ask a modern woman why being strong and independent is such a wonderful thing and why motherhood is slavery, they won't be able to give you an answer that makes sense. It makes you wonder how much they actually believe what they're saying, or if they're just trying to convince themselves that's what they want.
Ones like Alfred Kinsey, who used minor rape victims as data points in his deviant sex agenda. But it gets even darker than that, because when you look at how we got to where we are now, you have to go back to the early 20th century, because World War I and II did not just reshape geopolitics, they completely reshaped the culture of the home. See if you can notice the common denominator. Those two wars pulled tens of millions of men out of their houses, out of their communities, and out of their roles as spiritual and moral anchors of the family. And the architects and modernist ideologues behind the sexual revolution that we see today understood exactly what that meant. A home without a man is a home without resistance. While the men were overseas, women became the primary audience for every new form of messaging. Government propaganda, mass advertising, corporate marketing, film, magazines, and emerging psychological techniques. For the first time in history, institutions had unfiltered access to the emotional and social center of the household, and they used it aggressively. This wasn't because women were weak, it's because women are the relational core of civilization. Women shape the moral environment. Women are the gatekeepers of culture to a large extent, and modernists understood this, so it targeted women first. That if it could get women to completely drink their Kool-Aid, that men would eventually follow because they wanted sex.
The argument that men are just bedroom fun crazed morons is actually deeply insulting, and that's one thing that modern women will never seem to understand. And even when men make it clear that we want deeper things than just that, they call us liars and accuse us of being bigots.
I think they got that wrong, but I'll explain that in a little bit. And you might be saying, Zach, you're such a conspiracy theorist. All of this is just conservative propaganda. Well, then why did advertisers, Hollywood studios, and early PR firms like Edward Bernays openly write about this? He said, if you want to change society, you don't start with the men. You start with the women because women influence everything downstream. The home, the children, the social expectations, and yes, even the behavior of men. There's a reason that 70 to 80% of all consumer purchasing decisions in North America are made by women. And here's where the manipulation of men comes in, because modernists assume that once women embraced the new worldview, men would eventually follow. Not because the men were ideologically convinced, but because the men wanted to stay in relationship with the women.
There does come a point where the cost is too high. Men can't easily fall in line with what they're pushing because it goes against our very nature. We see what women have become in today's world, and frankly, a lot of guys are just not interested in what they see.
The male opt-out, the manosphere, the backlash, the Christian movement, the reactionaries, they're all waking up. Whether you believe it's misguided or not, it's fundamentally the moment when men stopped being willing to trade their integrity for acceptance. And once the sex is no longer enough to make men submit to the propaganda, the whole system starts to fall apart naturally. Men aren't rejecting women, they're rejecting the ideological system that hijacked women. And the bad news to all the evil people behind this is that they will simply never win this battle because they fundamentally misunderstand human nature. And that's because they philosophically reject the creator of human nature. They reject the blueprint itself, and that's why they can't succeed.
There's no way that you can keep men down for too long. Once men wake up and see the world for what it is, there's no going back to sleep, and there's no forcing men to step in line. We see it, we reject it, and we go our own way, and that's something that only we can control, not the powerful people.
They don't understand human nature because they don't believe it was created. To them, people are raw material, pliable, programmable, and infinitely malleable, and if you just tweak the right knobs on the dashboard of society, you will get the result that you want, and you will control the society the way you want. And that's why their system is already cracking. Not because of some heroic rebellion, not because of a political movement, but because they tried to build a civilization on top of a blueprint that they don't even believe exists. You can't rewire men to stop being men. You can't rewire women to stop being women. You can't replace family with ideology. You can't replace virtue with dopamine. You can't replace meaning with activism. There's no version of reality where that works long term. And look, let's be honest, some people on the reactionary side see this collapse too. Like the Andrew Tates of the world, the manosphere guys, the black pill, the red pill, whatever pill movements. Even I as a Catholic can admit that they get some things right about the symptomology of the problem, but their conclusion is basically fine. Burn it down. Don't marry. Don't commit. Don't care. Stack cash. Sleep around and detach.
That's not entirely accurate. One of the most overlooked points here is that men can disagree with each other and still get along anyway. Nobody speaks for us, and that's the way it should be. You can't think for yourself if we all blindly agree anyway. But anyway, guys, we are going to be leaving today's episode there. Don't forget to subscribe on your way out. Click this video that's up on the screen now if you want to see more. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace.